Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. I'm Captain Logan.
And I am Vince.
And this is our final week on writing, our workshop on writing.
And you'll know everything you've ever needed to know about writing. In 5 weeks, half-hour segments.
Yes, that's right. Isn't that impressive? In this free writing workshop, we are able to tell you everything you ever needed to know about writing. No, that's absolutely not true, Vince.
Yeah, no, go forth and pretend to be Charles Dickens. I do that every weekend. I stand on my roof and I yell out, "I am Charles Dickens," and then the cops come and we all have tea together.
And you do a writer's workshop with the cops.
Yeah. You know, Officer Bill has terrific poetry, I'm just saying.
For the first 4 weeks, we talked about writing and about what makes for effective writing, and we even got into the various parts of writing, like dialogue and exposition and things like that. Today, we're going to talk about what I like to call the writing life, and what goes into keeping yourself motivated and doing it. What does it mean to be a writer? Being a writer is not just saying I want to be a writer. It's actually doing the work. So how do you keep yourself doing that? What goes into the writing life? And we're also going to talk about publishing a little bit at the end. So, Vince, let's start with workshopping, which is something that we had to do, of course, a ton in school. And we've said this before, but we were kind of taught a lot more about how to critique fiction than we even were really how to write it.
Yeah, that's very true. Unfortunately so.
Well, not entirely. I mean, yeah, I do kind of wish that I had done more writing in some classes than workshopping, but workshopping is really good for you.
And workshopping can help you write. I mean,
absolutely.
Breaking down a work and putting it back together, you know, making things make sense in your head, and then you see how certain tropes work within various kinds of fiction, and as you break things down, you can build stuff in your head wholly separate from the things that you've broken apart in the past.
So what I kind of wanted to talk about first was just giving you an idea of what to expect in a workshop if you find yourself in a creative writing class, be it, and frankly, this is usually done the same way no matter the genre, be it playwriting or screenwriting or fiction. And my experiences are mostly in fiction, so that's mostly what I'm going to talk about. But we had very similar workshopping going on in our playwriting class, didn't we, Vince?
Yeah, indeed.
So we'll kind of tell you sort of what to maybe expect if you find yourself in a workshop, and this may also help you in putting together your own workshop if you find a group of writers, people who want to write and they all want to get together and look at each other's work. These are kind of some ideas of the best way to go about it in doing it in a professional way, in a kind and in a objective way, in an organized way. So what we usually had was, you have a moderator. Obviously, in school, that would be the professor, and what the moderator is there for is just to help facilitate the conversation. Sometimes they don't even say a whole lot. It's just helping to decide who's going to speak when, so there's not a lot of people talking over each other or one person dominating the entire conversation, as I have a tendency to do. And so what you'll do is you'll either kind of go round robin around the room and each person will say a couple things about the work and then they'll move on, or people will just put their hands up when the moderator says, let's talk about this particular thing first. Like, let's start with characterization. Let's talk about the dialogue, et cetera, et cetera. And then the moderator chooses who speaks when. Most important thing when you're in a workshop is be constructive with your criticism. Don't just rake people over the coals, and don't nitpick.
Yeah, be constructive. Don't bring a bazooka to your workshop or anything. That would be bad because that's destructive. Now, when you say don't nitpick, that's I think we have such a varied definition of what nitpicking is.
Well, yeah, that's certainly true, but I mean, use your own judgment. And a lot of times, people are going to get kind of deep and into the nitty gritty when they're doing workshopping. But I guess what I mean is, don't focus too hard on the small stuff. Make sure that at least you're starting with the big, most important stuff, and you want to think about all the stuff that makes for effective narrative. Start with all the things that we were talking about the first and second week. Look into it and try to decide, is there a break in the status quo? Is the protagonist sympathetic? What is the conflict? What is the opportunity for change? Is there a satisfying conclusion? Et cetera, et cetera. Start with that stuff, and don't come right out the gate and go, well, the dialogue was flat. That's important. You want to talk about that, but you want to make sure that the fundamentals are there.
Yeah, start worrying about the quality of life after you got the food, water, and shelter taken care of.
Vince, we were in a lot of workshops together, and we used to talk a lot about our workshops. And what would you say was like some of the more like useful kinds of criticism that you would get?
I always found it useful when somebody would try to understand your story and tell you how things are fitting together and how things are not working together. Say, well, this scene seems utterly useless, and here's why I don't think it works. And I say, oh, okay, well, maybe I should cut that, or maybe I should find a way to make that more integral to the overall plot, because otherwise it's just some superfluous scene that's sitting in my short story or play or whatever. So I think it's interesting, or I think it's useful when people will point things out that seem to just be existing for no reason, just for the sound of my own words, because I think some people get caught up in that, and I'm certainly not exempt from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the thing that can be tough about about workshopping, and it's not a perfect system. It's kind of like the court system. It's not perfect. The problem with it is if you workshop with a group of people long enough, you start to get to know them and you start writing for them, and that can be problematic.
So what you do is you join 2 or 3 different groups and you rotate every couple weeks.
Well, actually, we did something sort of like that in one of our classes, if you'll recall.
Oh, yeah, I suppose that's a good point.
Where we and I always thought it was kind of strange, but after a while I kind of understood it. And you don't have to do it that way, but I mean, because even still, you're still going to get to know these people. I mean, we would be in 3 different groups in that class. And you'd rotate around, but every now and again, you'd of course end up with some of the same people. So I mean, you still knew those people. But anyway, you also, when you go to a workshop, have to be prepared. You don't want to just read the story once. Excuse me. You don't want to just read the story once and walk in. You need to have a written critique that you can hand the person, because you're not going to be able to say everything you want to say. And one of the things that's really helpful about written critiques is that if you're workshopping with 20 or 25 people, and you read their written critiques, and you see 14 people all had the same problem with your story, it's very likely to be a problem. So you want to look for patterns. It's really useful when people are actually saying the same things.
And that's why a written critique is so useful, because maybe they didn't think it was significant enough to mention in class or during the workshop or wherever. But when you suddenly start looking down through all these critiques, and somebody says, oh, well, this was this guy's footnote, but that was that guy's major point, and it seems to be that that's happened for 5 or 6 different people on both sides. Oh, well, now we have 10 to 12 people saying. So.
Yeah, and you also want to take everything people say with a grain of salt. You want the work to speak for itself, and if it doesn't speak for itself, then that's what revision is for. The other thing is that when you're in a workshop, most of the ones I've done, the writer isn't actually allowed to speak during the critique, and is sometimes at the end allowed to ask questions, but never to defend their work. That's what the work is for. And if it can't defend itself, then that's going to help you decide what needs to be fixed. Don't have so much of an ego to actually feel like you have to sit there and go, well, you people didn't understand my work. And well, if you have to stand there and explain it to them, then it's not working.
And if you're sitting there trying to think, well, why don't these people understand my work? If your answer is, I'm trying to write something about an issue, again, that's a problem.
Yeah. Or if it's you have to know me to understand this. It's well, then you wrote that for yourself. You didn't write something to be consumed by other people.
I've talked to people like that before. They say that, like, well, that's very personal and deep. And I say, well, then we have no reason presenting this to the public.
Yeah, not entirely. I mean, like, and you could certainly point to a lot of very famous works of literature that kind of have that, but there still has to be something that you can latch onto.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's kind of workshopping in a nutshell. Did you have anything to add to that, Vince?
Oh, well, maybe this. I think this is kind of an interesting point. When I was in school, I was talking to a professor about how he ran his creative writing class, and he said that he performs the duties of a moderator, but the benefit of going to a class as opposed to going to a workshop is that the professor has sort of a learned critique, a guy who has been to school to learn the stuff that would enable him to critique things with the professional status, whereas the students are kind of giving the audience reaction. And so I recommend, if you have a chance, take a class rather than just have a writing group. But writing groups are good too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Don't feel that you can't experience the quote writing life without paying money and going to school. There are certainly avenues, and this is interesting, Vince. I don't know if I've ever told you about this, but I started going to, and I don't go now just because I'm actually not free when they meet. But I used to go to the writing workshop, the Kansas City Writers Workshop. And they workshopped in a way I've never seen before, and it was very useful. What they would do is they wouldn't expect you to read the work ahead of time. You'd go to the class, and I mean, I don't love this because you couldn't have written critiques. But what I did like about it is you'd go there, and the entire work was read aloud. So they would do either short stories or up to 10 pages of a novel. You couldn't have any more than that because it wasn't time to read more than that. And the moderator read it. The person who wrote it did not read it. And that was extremely useful.
Yeah.
Because like we talked about a couple weeks ago, or maybe even last week, it's really useful to hear someone else read what you wrote to see how they're interpreting it and to see if what you wrote on the page is working because, after all, you don't have line delivery in something that you just wrote down on paper. So to hear somebody else read it aloud to see if they're interpreting it right is really interesting, and really, really helpful. So if you want to do your own writing workshop, you get together with some folks, I would recommend having someone else read it aloud, even if you do written critiques.
The syntax of a sentence can be written the same way, and depending on how you say it can drastically change the meaning of it. Some things can sound flat just written on a page, and there needs to be some sort of a flair to it in order to bring it to life, I suppose. But that was one of the things that I found interesting. Some friends would say, "Hey Vince, would you read this?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I'd read it, and it seemed really flat to me, and there didn't seem like there's any life in their words. And I know that's hardly a nice critique to say, because it's not like I'm giving any real constructive criticism. But this is for your guys' benefit. You have read it, and I'd hand it back to them, and I'd ask them what they were trying to get across with these sentences, and then I'd try to give them some pointers on whether or not, like if they're trying to write a horror story, and their statement was "I want to scream," that could sound very well, it could sound very plain, like "I want to scream." Well, I was sitting in detention the other day because I'm a middle school student who wrote on the walls with graffiti, and I want to scream. That doesn't mean that I'm horrified. It just means that I want to scream.
Well, and that's interesting too, Vince, because one thing that we haven't talked about very much, and we don't have a lot of time for, is word choice, which is something that you can really help figure out if you've got down when somebody else reads it aloud.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and move on then to just the act of writing itself. And here's a few pointers. And Vince, feel free to add to this. These are kind of my big things. But if you've got some too that you think of, go ahead and throw them out. So this is about how to keep yourself going in writing and how to continue to improve. The cliche is write every day, and I agree with that to a point. What a lot of people think sometimes when they hear write every day is write on your big project every day, and that doesn't always work. you're going to have days where you just need to step back from the work you're doing, and you're going to have days where you just aren't in the state of mind you need to be in. Like, I don't want to make this too much about, like, emotions or whatever, but sometimes you need to be in a particular state of mind in order to work on whatever it is that you're writing. And, like, if you're writing something really upbeat and you're in a really bad mood, you probably shouldn't work on it. And vice versa, you know what I mean? If you're writing something that's kind of brooding and you just had the best day ever, this might not be the day to work on that. But that doesn't mean that you can't write other things.
You know, to some extent, I do agree with you. Actually, that's good advice. But to some extent, I also think that it's good to just sit down and make yourself do a project sometimes, because
that's true.
If you feel like, well, I'm just going to do another stream of consciousness today, well, you know, maybe you're just nervous about starting your project or continuing your project or completing your project. So, you know, if you're feeling a little off, I would say, but if it, I'd say just try something else. But if it becomes recurring, I'd say, give it a shot. Throw caution to the wind and listen to some music to get yourself in the mood or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got some pointers about that when we get into the section on writer's block. That's right. We've got a whole section on writer's block, Vince.
Right on. Writer's block.
But yeah, you don't have to work on a big project every time you sit down and write. And I really agree with you, Vince. If it's been 3 weeks and you really need to work on your project and you're like, well, I write every day, so I'm writing, but I'm not actually working on this thing that I really want to work on. Yeah, you can get depressed. You might want to just get some words out, even if it's not very good. But other things you can do, you can write a short story if you've been working on a novel for a while. Quit, try something smaller. You don't have to start another big project, but you can also just do like writing exercises and things like that. You can find good, interesting writing exercises in books and even all over the internet. Although I would caution you to really find this is weird, but I mean, like, some of them are just kind of dumb and not that helpful. I don't know. Find the good ones, but I can't tell you at the moment what those are. So anyway, that wasn't extremely helpful, Vince.
Yeah, here's a writing exercise for you. End every word that you say in a rune.
Oh no.
That'll help you out.
Second to write every day. And I'd love to say this is even more important. I think it's maybe just equally important, but write every day if you can. Read every day. Reading every day is easier than writing every day, so you should do it. I kind of see reading as like stretching. If you compare it to exercise. I mean if you compare it to like doing like a sport. So like reading is the writer's stretching for the game, and writing is like bodybuilding. You know what I mean? So writing is when you're writing all the time, you're really building up your skills, and when you're reading, you're getting yourself ready to do the job.
Yeah, you don't want to pull a big hammy right before the game.
The reason, of course, that reading is so important to writing is because you need that to really build vocabulary, but also to just get a sense of how different people put sentences together. You can't really mature as a writer if you're not seeing how other people do the job. And it's not about mimicking how other people do things, but you will pick up on stuff that really works, or that you will discover is really your kind of style when you're reading a lot of different kinds of things. And I would really caution people not to just read the same kinds of things all the time. Really venture out and try a lot of different authors.
I think that's part of how people develop a unique voice, is they consume a lot of stuff, and all that stuff becomes part of them. You are a collection of your past, essentially. Mm-hmm. And if your past is forced into one little tunnel where you're reading the only thing available, maybe you're living in the library in the mystery section and you've only ever read Arthur Conan Doyle. Sorry, I don't know why you can't move over to the fiction section and grab Zorro or something. I'm not sure where I'm going with this. It was going to be funny, and now I'm just like trying to create some ridiculous analogy. Anyway, moving on.
And lastly, of course, you just want to be a writer. Vince, have you talked to people before who like are kind of in denial they say they're a writer but they never write anything?
Oh yeah.
That kind of happens all the time, and it just doesn't have to. Again, even if you're not working on a big project, just do some writing. as often as you can. Sit down and try some things, even if it's just for a few minutes. And I always like to say that writers write and not necessarily well. It's not important that you rock at it, because you're not going to rock at it until you start really doing it. You're not gonna put on a costume and go stand on a stage and put a mic to your mouth and suddenly be a rock star. And writing is exactly the same way. You have to practice and you have to do it a lot. So allow yourself, and I think this is a point I have a little bit later with writer's block, but allow yourself to suck. Really, like write some bad stuff. If all you can write right now is bad stuff, write some bad stuff. You'll get the good stuff after you've got the bad stuff out of your system. How you really improve is just doing the work, but also find some good writers if you can. Talk to good writers. Read literature on writing. Read, of course, good writers. But like I said, just let yourself write all the time.
Do you think there's any benefit to reading bad stuff?
Only if you know it's bad. Yes, I do. I think that it is helpful if you recognize that things aren't working, to have examples of what not to do.
I'd agree with that.
I've always felt that way with criticism too. Critics don't like to just watch good things because they have to critique bad things also. And so to keep yourself in practice, you have to watch some bad stuff occasionally so that you can remind yourself, oh yeah, that's how not to do that.
So here's your guys' homework assignment. Go to your library and check out anything by Orson Scott Card and anything by Stephenie Meyer, and then compare.
Oh man, okay, moving on. So writer's block. We got this question when we did our live show the other day, and I get questions on this a lot. So here are a few ideas of what to do if you have writer's block. If either you can't think of something to get started with, or you are stuck in the middle of something and you're not sure where to go. We talked earlier about reading a lot of different kinds of things. When you've got writer's block, I really think that you need to get fired up, you need to get inspired, you need to get excited. And the way I do that is by reading authors I know I love and watching movies by writers that I admire. It ggets me excited. And again, it's not about trying to copy people and just do the same thing that other people have done, but it's inspiration. It gets you excited. You're like, oh yeah, that's what I love about writing.
That's interesting. One of the things that I always kind of appreciated, and if you're part of the problem with having writer's block is that there is this you're stunted for any ideas. There's nothing coming in because you're really not taking anything. You're just trying to sit in there. You're sitting there staring at a wall and thinking of wall. Well,
yeah.
What is coming into my head other than nothing? So generally, I find that the times that I have the least writer's block is when I'm reading or watching a lot of things, because especially if I find a particular work of literature that seems to have, not necessarily that the work of literature is bad or that there's something missing from it, but maybe there's an aspect of it that I would find interesting to explore. Like, oh, well, here's this part of this science, or like, well, why wouldn't this robot do this? How would robots react like that? I understand I'm reading a science fiction novel. I'd kind of like to know about that. And then suddenly a light clicks in your head and you say, oh, well, that's not what this novel's about, but mine could be about that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, you find another angle on something where like something very small is thrown into something. And you're like, what if I just made something about that?
Yeah.
And like I said, find inspiration. Like Vince said, don't just stare at a wall. I can only think of one time where staring at a wall actually gave me an idea.
He wrote The Wall and sold it to Pink Floyd.
No, that would be awesome. No, there's actually, not that I want to talk too much about my book, but there's actually, I actually did that. I was sitting around trying to think of some things one day while I was working on my novel, and I looked at the wall, and I came up with there's a character in the book who actually stares at a wall, and that's a game that they play on her home dimension.
Franklin's wife. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that was me staring at a wall having writer's block.
What's amusing is that I always think of Sarah when I think of Franklin's wife. I don't know. I always think of you when I think of Franklin. I don't know why. Just kind of in my head.
Which is funny because most of the people who have read the book so far really can't stand that character.
Can't stand. Oh,
Not Franklin, but Lyra. Anyway, I'm sorry. So like we said, find inspiration. Go outside. Watch life happen. People watch. Watch nature. Watch traffic. Listen to conversations. And one thing that can be really useful is bring a notebook with you and look at things that are happening and just write it down. Describe it on paper. Again, thinking about how to put words together. How would I describe this thing that's happening in an interesting and provocative way?
yeah. That's good advice. I mean, maybe some people would think it's creepy to go out there and listen to people eavesdrop and watch what people do, but I don't. I don't know. I find it interesting. I used to, we had this big thing at KU called Wesco Beach, and there wasn't actually a beach. It's just the lawn in front of a building, and I'd go sit down there and just watch everybody do what they're doing and listen to what
I always
they're
thought that
talking
was just people in Kansas being in denial about being landlocked.
No, seriously, we're not in Kansas. No, Lawrence, you really are in Kansas. I'm sorry. It's a reality that you have to face.
I mean, Wesco Beach isn't even near a fountain. I don't understand.
Well, there's a drinking fountain inside.
Anyway, sorry. No, I'm with you. I've talked to lots of people who are like, yeah, that's kind of creepy. Like you said, to just sit around or stand around and watch people do things. But I mean, your story should be real in some way. Like we said last week, it should reveal some sort of truth. And how are you going to understand life if you don't watch life and experience life?
So I was taking a modern American literature class at KU, and this guy says to me, this guy being the professor, so it's not like some just strange dude walked up to me, hey, by the way. No, it was the professor comes over to me and says, what are you studying? And I said, creative writing. And he said, oh, well, you'd benefit more from just being at a bar and talking to people than you would be from sitting in my class. And I thought that was interesting. So, find inspiration. I mean, people watch is a good thing. Listening to conversations is a good thing because you remove yourself from the equation, so you see how people react with somebody who's not you. But I would also recommend going out there and just striking up conversations with people and just getting to know people. You don't necessarily need to make friends. You don't need to make enemies. Just go out there and try something that's small talk. Try stuff that's not small talk. See what you can do. Test the boundaries of reality.
I'm glad that's not a piece of advice you're giving, Vince. If you got writer's block, go out there and make some enemies.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you need to reenact some sort of ridiculous lifestyle that you're trying to write about, and by ridiculous I mean fantastic. So I apologize for that word choice. But
no, see, that's why you're saying it out loud. See, we can hear how your word choice is.
Yeah. See, I say it to you guys, and you understand what I'm talking about. But when you look at the word ridiculous on page, suddenly another word or another feeling comes to mind. So.
I love that. I'm going to start using that. And by ridiculous, I mean fantastic. Like I always say, if you've got writer's block, don't sit there and try to think of that big idea that's never been done. That's what a lot of folks do. Like you said, looking at the wall, it's like, I need to think of that thing that nobody's ever done. Inspiration is going to hit you. So like we said, go out and live life and let it come to you. Step away from the thing that you're writing for a while if you're in the middle of something and you have writer's block. If not just like when you can't think of anything to start, but when you're in the middle of something. And step away from it for a while, work on something else, come back to it. We were talking about writing exercises and stuff. Sometimes I find it can be kind of helpful and even inspiring to just sit down and write a conversation between two people.
Yeah. I mean, then you got to figure out, what would you write? But, I think that's part of the beauty of conversations is they sort of just evolve. So it starts with,
exactly,
hey,
yeah.
How you doing? Oh, I've been over here at this place all day. Oh, yeah, well, so-and-so was over there and he beat his wife. Oh, well, let's talk about wife beating.
Yeah, in fact, I'm giving this advice to anyone except for Vince. No, but yeah, I mean, because just because you write something down doesn't mean you have to use it for anything. It can be sometimes it's just something you need to do for yourself. This is really important, and this is something people don't do because it doesn't feel natural. But really, and I don't know if you'd agree with this, Vince, but I have found this to be the case with me, especially writing big projects. If a scene is not working, just skip it. Especially if you know where it's going and you have anything like an outline. And again, I don't always condone outlining with fiction, but if you know what's coming, skip it for a minute, come back to it later, and sometimes you're going to write things out of sequence. The first scene of my novel has changed more than 5 times. What's chapter 1 right now used to be 20 pages later in the book. I mean, things are going to get moved around and stuff like that. And that was very often just me going, yeah, this isn't working, but I know what I want to do later. So I'll start there and I'll come back to it. I mean, you got to be organized to make that work, but it's just like with anything else. If you sit there and you're stuck in one place forever, there may be other parts of the project you could be working on.
Yeah, I mean that's not bad advice. I'd agree with that. But the advice that I would give is, if you're working on a scene and it's not working, finish it. I mean, write whatever crappy part of that scene needs to just get on page. Get out of your head, exercise the demon onto the page, and once you have a whole scene, you can move on to the next one. You can change it in revisions. I mean, part of the problem why I'll have issues writing something, or if the scene's not working for me, I'll have trouble finishing the entire thing, because I'll sit there and I'll say, well, why isn't this scene working? So, good advice, skip it. Also, in my opinion, just get whatever's thought in your head is on page. Just get it out, because sometimes you get hung up on your own thoughts.
Yeah, and just get a draft.
Yeah.
Just get a draft, and I mean, let it be awful if it's awful, but I mean, if you've got something to work with, then and we're about to talk about revision, so let's just kind of get in on that. But most of writing is revision. You sit down and you get it on paper, and then the work begins. A lot of people think they're finished when they have a draft, and you're not. Most of writing is fixing it.
Mm-hmm. And that's what workshopping, that's the beauty of workshopping. You get a draft, you fix what you think needs to be fixed. I mean, obviously, if you have a finished draft, you can go back and correct things on your own. And then you workshop it, and then you correct some more, and then you workshop it again, you correct some more.
Something I am really bad at, that I think is really important to do, and I mean, I'm saying this and I don't do this, and I need to, but I'm awful at it. Don't revise anything until you're finished with an entire draft. And Vince is always saying this, and Vince is always pushing this, and I'm terrible at it, but I will write 3 chapters, and I will work on those 3 chapters for a week. I mean, that's just, I keep reworking stuff while I'm in the middle of writing, and just get it down, get a draft done, and then revise. Even if you know it's got to be changed, even if you get it down and later on you look at it and you go, no, I gotta change this. No, because a lot of times that's how people end up not finishing things.
Yeah. Cap, you say I'm always pushing it, which is true. I'm always pushing it, but that's because it's one of my biggest faults. I realize that I have that problem, and in the middle of it, I get hung up on it. I'm like, I have to change this. I'll write a bunch of I'll write 20 pages a night, and then I'll delete 10 the next day, and I go, why did I do that?
Yeah, and I mean, I do finish things. I rarely will get halfway through something and not ever finish it. But what I do is I'll write 20 pages, and then I'll spend the rest of the afternoon editing those same 20 pages.
Yeah, and you're still 50 pages away from being done with whatever you're writing. So
yeah, exactly. So just get there, and then work on it. You'll feel a lot more of a sense of accomplishment if you do that, and you'll be more positive about the work, and that's important.
And that's part of the reason why I support the outline ideas, because you get something on page and you go back and you say, well, this doesn't make sense. Why did I put that in there?
Yeah. And once again, with outlining, just don't feel like you're glued to that, because if your characters need to go a different way to be consistent, and you're learning about them, and it's like, oh, that character wouldn't do this, change that outline. Don't stick to it, or it's gonna be really, really flat. one of the really important things I think with revision that a lot of people don't do, and I don't know how you do this, Vince, but I think it's really important when you have a draft to print it out and mark it up. There's a lot of stuff you're not gonna catch when you just look at it on the screen. My wife had to teach me that. I used to that used to be the only way that I would edit, and is just going back and look at it on the screen.
Well,
and
it's cheaper, to be frank.
well, it is. That's true. But at the same time, there's something about how people's eyes and their minds work where it's easier for a lot of people to skip words on a screen in a way they wouldn't do it when they're looking at it on paper. And plus, with that pen in hand, you're just going to look at it more meticulously, circling things and marking things up than when you're just looking at it on a screen. You'll get 20 pages in on a screen. I do this. You get 20 pages in on a screen sometimes, and you'll be sick of doing it, and so you'll start making mistakes and not paying enough attention.
I totally agree. Like, I remember submitting something to a class that I had not started doing that for printing things out. I had not started doing that. And, the last line was, I meant it to be something poetic and artful, and, I've written, dissipates in the hair.
What?
Yeah. Actually, that was one of the stories I submitted for a class that I was in with you. And
I don't remember you writing that, though.
I'd written, what I'd intended to write was, the smoke dissipated in the air, and I said hair. And it was the last line in the story. And,
yes, that's awesome.
And the reason being that I didn't catch that is because I'd only had it on my computer. I'd gotten tired of it by the time I got in the end. And, I was reading somebody's critique of my story because they'd printed it out and they'd written on it. And one of the things they'd written on there was, as of an image as this is, you might want to change it. I went, oh, crap, really?
And once again, spell check doesn't fix everything, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because hair is a word. Really, we've gotten so lazy in our culture with writing because we think that the computer can fix all of our mistakes, and the computer has no idea what your ideas are and what you're trying to convey. It just knows what's grammatically and punctuationally correct. So you've got to read it yourself. You got to read it out loud. You got to print it off. You got to circle stuff. And once again, of course, like we always say, be willing to cut. Make sure your sentences are flowing from one to the next, and if it's not necessary, just get rid of it. Don't fall in love with words. If they're not working, if you don't need them, get rid of them. And you're going to write a lot more than you need in a first draft. It's okay if you overwrite a bunch in a first draft, as long as you're willing to take out entire chunks that just don't need to be there. Because sometimes I find that for myself, I need to reiterate something 2 or 3 times while I'm writing, just to remind myself of what I'm trying to convey, and then I'll go back later and go, yeah, I totally reiterated this 3 times. I don't need these other 2 iterations, so then I'll take them out.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, there is no exact length requirement for whatever you're writing. So, because of course you're writing
for yourself. If it works, it works, and that's the point of having other people look at it. If you're writing it for other people to read it, you need other people to tell you if it's effective or not.
I mean, for example, the average screenplay is 120 pages, and Woody Allen thinks that the ideal screenplay is 90 pages. So take that as you will.
Oh. And finally, in revision, this is really important. Let people you don't know very well read your work. If you can get somebody you don't really know that well, and I know I'm opening the floodgates because we're probably going to get a whole bunch of messages now. Would you guys read my work? And we don't always have time. We apologize about that. But if you can find folks that have the time and are willing to read your stuff, really do that, because your mom, your dad, your brother, your girlfriend, they might say it's genius or they might say it sucks. Either way, those people don't count. Okay, they're like a jury. They have to be impartial.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that if somebody says you'd be good at this, it's because they think that you'd be good at that because that's how they know you. Like, oh, you're a comic book guy. Well, you'd be good at writing children's things, right? Shut up. That's not nice. I don't appreciate it. I'm kidding about that part, but still, does that make sense?
Yeah, but also, people who know you really well, a lot of times they're either going to be overly critical of you because they know you well enough, and they know that they know that they can be that way. And also keep in mind, of course, that you have to take it with a grain of salt if you're talking with people who don't actually know a lot about the writing process themselves, that kind of thing, or who don't read a lot. But also, the flip of that, of course, is you give it to your girlfriend, and she might say it's genius because she's trying to be nice to you, or she might think that it's genius because she's impressed that you did something she didn't know you were able to do, that sort of thing. She's got a personal stake in it, so that might not be the person. That's not to say that you shouldn't have people read your stuff, but they're not necessarily the people that you should be paying attention a great deal to the criticism.
That's an interesting point. I'd never actually thought about that, but sometimes people can get this sort of like mild form of starstruck, like, wow, I didn't know I was, near a person who was that talented. I didn't realize that was dating or related to or friends with a guy that could do that. And, maybe what they're really picking up on is potential rather than a completed, absolutely genius piece of work.
That's right, an idea over execution. Oh, what a clever idea. Well, clever doesn't always equal executed well. And I've had that a lot too, where people would look at my stuff, and my stuff is I think highly creative, but that doesn't mean that it's always that it's always effective. And so you have to look at it objectively, and you have to get people to look at it objectively. And it's really, really important to find somebody who's willing to also just look at your thing and help you edit it, because even you with a pen sitting down with a piece of paper with your stuff written on it, circling things, you're not always going to find everything because you're the one who wrote it. You're close enough to it that you're going to skip over things, even if you do it that way.
Yeah, that's why major publishing companies, with all of their big fancy writers being contracted to them, will have people on staff who can edit their books for them.
Well, I know we've got a lot of material in this particular one, so it's going maybe even longer than some of the other long ones have gone. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about publishing. And I know this is something that I know a little bit more about you do, Vince. A little bit more than you do. Wow, that wasn't a sentence. Don't write that sentence. That wasn't a good sentence.
Or write it down and then revise it.
Here are a few ideas about publishing, just some advice of mine. And Vince, feel free to interject anytime there's anything you want to throw in. But I went ahead and just wrote this out because I know you haven't looked a great deal into it yourself. I've sent things to publishers a lot over the years, and had a bazillion rejection letters, and I know quite a bit about publishing. So you want to start off, of course, by just making sure you have a polished work before you try to publish. Just because your work is super polished doesn't mean it's necessarily going to get published, but you're going to get a lot closer than if a publisher takes one look at your piece and immediately starts noticing mistakes in punctuation and sentence structure and things like that. They're not even going to look any further. And also just be realistic. Think about the fact that most publishers get tons of mail, and they have to read a bunch of these a day, and most publishers don't read more than a few sentences, and sometimes not even that. So make sure that it's done, and that's gonna require extra eyes on the page.
One of the things that Kevin Wilmot told us about our screenplays was before you start sending these things out to people, make sure that it's make sure that there's no inconsistencies in format and punctuation and capitalization and all these things, because people start seeing inconsistencies like, wow, they didn't even care to make this look good, and they just dump it in the trash.
Yeah, professionalism is really important. And like we've said before, if you don't know how to correctly format things, and you don't know how to correctly do punctuation and all the grammar stuff, go back and learn anything that you haven't figured out yet. The most important tool for a person trying to get published is the current year's Writer's Market. It's a very thick book that has a list of publishers for all genres. It's going to have book publishers, magazine publishers, et cetera, screenplays, plays, that sort of, those sorts of things, everything. Plus, they also have essays on writing, and they also have parts that help you figure out how to write cover letters correctly, which is really important. So you're gonna want to find that for the current year. Be sure that you don't use an old year because you might send to a publisher that's not around anymore. And they're expensive. I think they run $30-$40, maybe even a little bit more. But you can usually also find it at your local library, and you may be able to just write down some of the publishers' names. Be sure you send to appropriate publishers and follow their criteria. Not every publisher is gonna publish the genre that you're wanting to publish. If you just wrote a science fiction story, make sure that you are looking at somebody who actually publishes science fiction. That might sound obvious, but publishers all the time get manuscripts from stuff that they just don't publish. It's not in their repertoire. So and just because it says science fiction doesn't even mean that it's your kind of science fiction. So do some research, and that kind of research is easier than it's ever been because a lot of these places have websites, and you can look at blurbs on the things that they published and get a sense if they publish things that are anything like what you're trying to publish. Some publishers will take unsolicited manuscripts. Unsolicited means that they didn't ask for you to send it to them, and some of them won't. Some of them will want just a cover letter, and then they'll want pages later, and some of them will want pages along with the cover letter. So pay attention to their criteria and make sure that you do what they ask you to. If you mess any portion of that up, they will not take you seriously. So make sure that it's formatted the way they ask you to. Some of them have very strange requests, and just if you want them to look at it, go with whatever they ask you to do. And the same is true with agented or unagented manuscripts. Sometimes they'll take a manuscript that does not come from an agent, and sometimes they won't. So keep that in mind too. There are quite a few publishers these days that will take just from anybody. And look at it and consider it. But there still are quite a few who only take agented manuscripts. And of course, some will want you to mail them things. Some will want it emailed. There's a lot of people these days. I know 10 years ago, nobody took emails at all. If I remember right, it really, you had to mail everything. These days, a lot more people are preferring email because there's a lot less hassle, and also, just understand that when you send somebody something, it takes sometimes months to come back. So, be patient, and write the most professional cover letter you can. They're all going to require cover letters, and so you want to be as meticulous or more meticulous than you were when you were editing your story, because again, you want that to look professional. You're presenting yourself. This is like going to a job interview, so you need it to look as professional as humanly possible. Look at the guidelines in the writer's market, like I said, on how to write a cover letter, and they're gonna tell you to do things like, sell yourself, but don't be cocky about it. Be concise, be to the point, but also be excited about your work. Like I said, really sell it, and tell the publisher why it's good for what they do, why it's a good fit for that publisher. Don't worry about compensation right out the gate. It's really easy to go, how much am I going to get paid? Well, try to get yourself out there before you're worrying about money. And also, just know that you should never have to pay to have your work read by a publisher. If a publisher asks you to give them a certain amount of money to even read your work, don't send to them because they shouldn't be doing that. You can send short stories to magazines. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to get published that way, to get something in a small magazine, especially than it is to get a first, novel published. And it's good for your resume. If you can get a few magazines published, you're a lot more likely to get a book published. Don't be shy about sending to more than one publisher. Some people will think, oh, what if, I send to a whole bunch of publishers and I get several letters of all these people want to publish my thing. Well, that would be a good problem to have, wouldn't it? I've never been in that boat. But and if it happens to you, great. But really, if you got that lucky and that happened to you, you can accept one and then reject all the others. So, you can certainly send several things to different publishers. I wouldn't recommend sending several works to the same publisher, but if you've got one thing and you send it out to 10 different publishers, that's certainly okay. This is the biggest thing. You're going to get rejection letters, okay? It's going to happen. You're going to get a lot of those.
What? No.
And they also, like I said, take a long time to get. That's right. Sometimes, and I'm just telling it like it is, sometimes you're going to, and a lot of the time, you're going to send out a letter to a publisher, and you're going to wait 3 months to get a rejection letter. Honestly, I really think that the only attitude to have is collect rejection letters like you'd collect comic books. Put them in a notebook, put them on the wall, be proud of them. Be proud that you tried it, that you did the work, that you're trying to get yourself out there. You'll hear countless and countless stories about all the different writers you've heard of who had 75, 100 rejection letters before anybody ever took them seriously, and now they're making a living at it. Keep those rejection letters and pay attention to them. If a publisher actually doesn't just give you a form letter, because sometimes they will actually give you advice, pay attention to that advice. Don't just be angry at them for not choosing your work. They may be telling you that key thing that can really help your thing be a little bit more marketable. And also keep in mind that just because somebody rejects something that you wrote doesn't mean that it's not marketable. It may just mean that it's not marketable for them, or that it's just not what they think their public is looking for right now. I've known hugely published authors that can't publish anything right now because what they write is too intellectual and too highbrow. It's terrible. It's really sad that happens, but it does. It may just be that the thing you're trying to write isn't commercial enough and that sort of thing, and it's a commercial game. So, like I said, I'm just telling you like it is. Also,
just because it's rejected doesn't mean it's bad. And just because, and even if it gets accepted doesn't mean it's good. So I think that's also important to keep in mind. It's a subjective art. Well, art is subjective, but still.
Also send to agents. Agents are also hard to get. They're just as hard to get as getting a publisher is. But if you can get one, it's then easier to get published. So, try that out. And, of course, people always ask me about self-publishing. That's how I've done it. Be sure, of course, like anything else, if you self-publish, only do that when you have a very polished piece of work. Because when you're self-publishing, you don't have any oversight. There's nobody telling you this must be this way, this must be polished, this must have good grammar, good punctuation, et cetera, et cetera. But you still want your readers to take you seriously, so you should have all of that. So self-publishing is fun. It's worthwhile. It's a good way to feel accomplished about what you're doing. You can make a little bit of cash, and I wouldn't recommend not continuing to send to traditional publishers though, unless you just don't want to. Unless you just want to sell for yourself. Because there's no reason that you can't continue sending to publishers even while you're selling your own book. It's yours. You own it. It's America, so you can do that. You can keep selling your book, and then if somebody makes a contract with you later, that's when you just stop self-publishing. But don't feel like don't feel like you're screwing a potential publisher just because you're self-published. I know people think that sometimes, but that's not a problem. Once again, get yourself an editor if you're going to self-publish. Don't make it a family member necessarily, and get and then you want to try to put it out there. So there's lots of ways to do that. You can try to get a book signing at a local bookstore. You can see if a local newspaper will run a story on your book. You can take it to conventions if it's appropriate. I take mine to sci-fi conventions and comic book conventions because it's a sci-fi book. So if you can find places like that it's appropriate for, you can take it there. And of course, if you have a lot of family and friends, they will probably buy it from you. So you've at least got that. But anyway, that's all my advice on publishing, Vince.
Yay! He was just talking to me on that one. So you guys could disregard it. He ended the statement in Vince, so I thought that'd be funny. Anyway, moving on.
Well, no, you're the other person here, so.
Nobody else will ever listen to this. It's just us.
Did you have anything to add to that? I know before we started you said, I don't know much about publishing, so you should just talk about that.
Yeah, well, I really don't know much about publishing, so yeah, there we go.
But yeah, so that's pretty much everything. Here are my last thoughts. If you want to write for a living, that's awesome. But if that's the only reason you're doing it, you're much more likely to fail at it. You're much likely to not make effective fiction. If you love it and you never make a living with it, then it's still worth doing. There's a lot of published writers who also have day jobs. Not everybody is necessarily going to make a living doing this, and it's just the way things are. And don't be cynical about it. I know I might have sounded a little bit cynical when I was talking about publishing, but I'm just being realistic and telling you how the world works. It doesn't take any enjoyment away from the art, if you don't let it. So finally, be a writer or don't be a writer. It's up to you.
No, that's good advice. Yeah. So in other words, he's saying, as Nike says, just do it. or don't.
And once again, you also have the option to be effective or not be effective. It's up to you. It's your work. If you want it to be effective for other people to read, here are our 5 weeks of advice on that. And anyway, that's about everything, Vince. Vince, what are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts are get something on page. Just put something on there, And really, I think that's where it is. Is just keep reading, keep watching, keep consuming as much as you can, and don't forget that you need to be writing at the same time. Write down as much as you can as well.
Well, everybody, thanks a lot for listening to our 5 weeks of writing advice. If you have any additional questions, feel free to leave a comment or send us a personal message. We'll get to you as soon as we possibly can. Once again, we can't guarantee that we can read and critique everybody's individual things. I'd love to make some more time for that. I do appreciate all of the folks who have asked us to do that, and really sorry we haven't had the time to get to it. But if you have any specific questions, feel free to send it to us, and we'll do our best to answer you. Thanks a lot for listening to Geeks Not Nerds, the podcast. I'm Captain Logan.
And I am Vince.
And we'll be back with you on a very different topic in 2 weeks. Actually, we're gonna skip next week because we're gonna be gearing up for a science fiction convention. In fact, we're gonna be in Kansas City at Conquest for 3 days, and we're gearing up for that. So we're actually not gonna be doing any videos next week. But we'll see you in 2 weeks. And thanks again for listening.